Today we're going to talk about Bitcoin mining. We're going to cover the following topics. What is Bitcoin mining? Why is Bitcoin mining necessary? Who are the Bitcoin miners? And what are the economic considerations around Bitcoin mining? We're also going to take a look at what some of the environmental considerations are and what regulations globally look like for Bitcoin mining across different jurisdictions. First, let's look at the Bitcoin user experience. So a Bitcoin user initiates a transaction to buy Bitcoin. This transaction goes into the mempool and it waits for a miner to pick the transaction for inclusion in the next block. Users can pay an extra fee to incentivize the miners to write their transaction to the next block, and this is called a transaction fee. Once the transaction is completed, the user can view that transaction in their Bitcoin wallet. So let's look at what the mempool is. The mempool is where transactions wait to be added to the next block. You can view these on mempool.space, which is a website that shows you all the transactions waiting to be included. The higher fee a user pays, the more chance they have of their transaction being added to the next block. So let's take a look at what miners do and the Bitcoin creation process. Miners write transactions to the blockchain, and this process rewards them with some Bitcoin, and this puts more Bitcoin into circulation. The benefit of the miners doing this proof of work means that you don't have to trust that the transactions are legitimate because somebody has expended energy in order to run that computation and win the right to write the transactions to the next block. This secures the network and it's called proof of work. So let's look at the block creation process in more detail. Miners listen for transactions that sit in the mempool, and in the meantime, they use CPU to try and guess a number called a nonce, which is a random number that has to be below a certain threshold. They compete with other miners to do this, and the first miner to guess the correct number or a selection of correct numbers that are below that threshold wins the right to include transactions in the next block. So they get the right to write those transactions to the next block and add them to the digital ledger. And for the process of doing that, they receive Bitcoin. That reward currently sits at 6.25 Bitcoin. In addition, they'll get any extra fees that users have paid to have their transactions included in that block if the miner chooses to include those transactions. Once those transactions have been written to the block, they are broadcast to the nodes. Anyone running a node is able to see these transactions and verify that they have been included correctly and that the proof of work was done. Once that process happens, that block is complete and the whole process restarts again with another block. So what does the equipment look like for Bitcoin mining? Well, it's basically a data center. So you have machines that are very similar to the machines that sit in any data center, but instead of including your Instagram photos on there, they have one function, which is simply to guess the nonce. You can see in the photo there is a data center worker who is arranging those Bitcoin miners into racks in much the same way as you would see in any other data center. So why is Bitcoin mining even necessary? Well, one of the misconceptions is that it's a waste of energy, but actually, Bitcoin mining is a feature and not a bug. The act of mining Bitcoin balances risk and reward and creates security for the Bitcoin blockchain. A blockchain without Bitcoin is like a light bulb without electricity. Bitcoin mining must be expensive because it has to be expensive to attack the network. So it's a feature and not a bug. So let's look at the Bitcoin hash rate. What is this and what does it mean? The number of cryptographic hash guesses that are made to solve the nonce is basically what the Bitcoin hash rate is. Every time a Bitcoin mining machine tries to win the lottery by guessing the correct nonce, it is creating cryptographic hashes. The more miners are trying to mine, the more hashes are produced. This is the hash rate, and it indicates how active the network is. A high hash rate also indicates that the network is more secure, as it is harder for a bad actor to muster the resource to attack the network. Now let's look at the difficulty adjustment for Bitcoin. The Bitcoin difficulty adjustment happens every 2 weeks. As miners try to solve the nonce, the difficulty of guessing the number increases. Miners have to work harder to guess the nonce, and this increases the cost of solving the puzzle and keeps the network safe from bad actors. The calibration happens every 2 weeks and creates a perfect market balancing of supply and of demand. Next, let's look at the Bitcoin halving process. So the Bitcoin reward currently sits at 6.25 Bitcoin. Every 4 years, that reward halves. It's approximately every 4 years or 210,000 blocks. So that reward will go down to 3.125. This creates scarcity, which ensures that the price goes up even though supply increases. So who are these Bitcoin miners? Well, we can see on this global map that most of the Bitcoin mining activity is currently happening in the United States. But there are other countries where there is a lot of activity as well, such as Canada and China as well. Bitcoin miners can be anybody. They can be companies or they can be individuals mining at home. So let's look at some of the economics of Bitcoin mining. One of the key considerations for Bitcoin miners is that the energy they use needs to be cheap, because this is what makes the mining of Bitcoin economically profitable. They also need reliable sources of energy. So renewable energy is not great for Bitcoin mining in many respects because it's not reliable in terms of its production. However, renewable energy such as hydro is good because you can reliably know that you're going to get that energy resource, as is nuclear power. So let's look at electricity grids. Electricity grids often require more than their usual capacity. When these spikes in demand occur, they can cause shortages. However, it is difficult to maintain profitability when you're increasing capacity that you don't usually require. Bitcoin miners can utilize excess capacity day to day, but they will be incentivized to stop consumption when demand is high as prices spike. This gives more power back to the grid and supports what is called load balancing. Independent energy grids such as Texas's energy grid find this particular feature incredibly useful with regards to Bitcoin mining. ERCOT is the company that manages Texas's energy grid, and they have said they want to be able to serve any business that wants to do business in Texas, and that includes Bitcoin miners. So they are very much in favor of having Bitcoin miners in Texas. Let's talk about some of the environmental aspects. So FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And it's a phrase that, or it's criticisms that are often leveled at Bitcoin's energy use. So let's look at some comparable industries. Banking, for example, uses 56 times more energy than Bitcoin mining. In addition, the world's top banks pumped 742 billion into fossil fuels, according to a report in 2021. So compared to an industry that is used by just about everybody in the world, Bitcoin mining is actually not that unclean or not that problematic from an environmental perspective. Let's also look at the comparison of Bitcoin mining with other emitters. This data comes from NYDIG and Galaxy. So Bitcoin mining, it's estimated, emits about 41 megatons of carbon. Compare that to air travel, which is 1,982 megatons. Banking, 130 megatons. Shipping, 1,503 megatons. Air conditioning, 984 megatons. And tumble dryers, 53 megatons. So as you can see, many other industries create far more emissions by a significant margin versus Bitcoin mining. So let's look at some of the Bitcoin mining regulations around the world. One of the most friendly jurisdictions is Texas. This is despite the efforts of Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, who is very against Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. But Bitcoin mining in Texas is legal, it's supported by the Texas Energy Grid, ERCOT, who advocate on behalf of it. And there are many mining companies that are domiciled in Texas now. New York, unfortunately, really recently enacted some legislation that says for the next 2 years, proof of work must use 100% renewable energy, or the companies that are mining cannot renew their permits. New entrants will not be allowed to come online. So it's to be seen whether New York remains an unfriendly state to Bitcoin mining or if this changes in the future. Canada is a great country for Bitcoin mining in terms of its natural resources and its hydro. However, provincial rules do differ, so many provinces do not have friendly regulation as it relates to Bitcoin mining. El Salvador was the first country in the world to legalize Bitcoin as legal tender. They are very much supportive of Bitcoin mining, and they are looking to use energy sources in their country, such as the many volcanoes that they have, to power Bitcoin mining. Lastly, let's look at China, where it is illegal but still very active. It's unclear whether it's the Chinese government that is actually mining the Bitcoin or whether these are private individual actors mining in the country. And then we also have the UK, where mining is currently legal. That concludes our presentation. We hope you learned a lot about Bitcoin mining, and thank you very much.